Our speakers today are Alan Lambshead. He is SMPTE's Standard Vice President. He's a SMPTE Fellow, and he's a member of the SMPTE Board of Governors. Also with us today is Howard Lukk. Howard is the aforementioned Director of Engineering and Standards on SMPTE staff. With that, gentlemen, I'm going to stop my webcam and turn the floor over to you guys.
Yes, welcome to this, our fourth standards webcast this year. We do these a few weeks after each of our standards meetings, which we run 4 times a year. Our most recent one was in London at the beautiful Sky TV facilities there in West London. And we had 69 people in attendance over 4 days, and we had a bunch of additional participation from all over the world by remote access. We are working on currently about 200 active projects, so we're not going to cover them all in detail here today because that would take far too much time. And in fact, I've mentioned many of them on the slides, but some of them I'm just going to sort of jump over quickly and try and focus on the highlights. As Joel mentioned, you will be getting a copy of a PDF of all the slides, so you'll be able to go back and review them later. Also, I wanted to mention that there is always a meeting outcome report posted on the SMPTE website at the URL posted on the screen there. And typically we try and get that uploaded within 2 or 3 weeks after the meetings. The most recent one from London was posted last week, I believe. So let's move right into it. And so just for those of you that aren't familiar with it, this is an overview of the organization of our SMPTE Standards community. We have the Standards Committee at the top, which oversees all the work. It consists of the TC chairs from each of the committees, plus 3 or 4 standards experts that have been involved for many years in our standards activities. And we value their wisdom immensely. So we have essence and metadata, which sort of affect all of the committees that we deal with. And then we have 4 applications committees, 1 for film, 1 for digital cinema, 1 for television and broadband, 1 for cinema sound systems. And then we have sort of the 4 infrastructure and media management groups, 1 on file structures, 1 on network and facilities infrastructure, 1 on media control systems, and 1 on media packaging for interchange. So we're going to sort of work through the committees in the alphanumeric order that they occur, and that's sort of going to be the structure of our time this afternoon. Again, there's just a listing of the committees, the names of them, and their short names, which we all know them by in the standards community. So we'll start with 10E, chaired by Ed Royce and Michael Zink, and so they're involved in a whole bunch of different projects. One of them is video compression. So SMPTE has standardized 5 different video compression formats over the years, and 2 of them are sort of actively being worked on right now. VC5, which is based on the Cineform GoPro codec, was published a couple of years ago, the fundamental documents, but they're being updated to add new features and new conformance information. So some of the new parts are almost finished, and you should see them available shortly. And then SMPTE 42 and 2047 document suites both are used to describe the VC2 video compression format, which was based on the Dirac Pro codec that was developed by BBC. And again, there's been some updates to that, mostly to support UHD. And in fact, there's a brand new document that was published in the last quarter, 2047-5, which is a new level of compression for UHD. And basically what it does, it's a mild mezzanine compression that allows you to compress UHD down into HD bandwidth so that it can be transported on HD infrastructure.
Yeah, we might also see some of this trickle into the 2110 stuff later on in that suite of documents. There's talk about using this type of compression along with the media over IP as well too.
That is correct. We'll get there in a little while. Another project that TNE is involved in is setting standards for reference displays. For decades, the CRT monitor was the reference display of choice. It was the only one that made sense. And over the last decade and a half or so, with the demise of the CRT, there's been a move into fixed pixel matrix type monitors, plasmas, OLEDs, LEDs, and a variety of other formats that use fixed pixel arrays. And so there were no standards for any of that stuff. So the 2080 project is really all about documenting how those displays work and how we measure them and how we calibrate them. So the first two parts were published in 2016 and in fact are undergoing a one-year review right now. Part 3 is a reference viewing environment that was published earlier this year, and then Part 4 is a big document that talks about how do we calibrate these kind of monitors so that we can get consistency. And typically these are used in the critical viewing environments in post-production facilities, primarily for setting proper color measurements in that. So it's very important that they're all consistent across the industry so that when we watch programs from various sources that they all look the same. So there's a bunch of other projects that TNE is working on. There's a lighting consistency, RP, which is basically, again, as LED lighting has become more and more common, how do we get consistency in lighting it? Lighting up the sets as we go through the production process. And then there's been a bunch of documents to do with metadata for wide color gamut and high dynamic range. And so some of those documents are now coming for their one-year review. So ST2086 is one of those, and it's currently passed its ballot, and the comments are in the process of being resolved. P3 has always been used and was buried deep in some of our other documents. So the P3 project is really just providing some kind of a normative reference so that it can be referenced by other documents going forward, especially as we look at setting color levels and things like that. And Safe Action, Safe Area, again, are being updated for UHD. The 20F committee is our Film Technology Committee. They meet on a different cadence from our normal standards committees. The people who attend those are meeting twice a year, usually in the CinemaCon conference in the spring and the annual technical conference in Hollywood in the fall. And they met during the conference. There hasn't been a report produced from them yet as to the outcome of that, but it was a very productive meeting.
Yeah, most of the 20F work has to do with review of documents that have been there for quite some time. So there's limited new activity, but a lot of review on older documents and stabilizing that stuff and keeping them tracked in as well with the ISO standards.
Right. The one new project they're working on is screen light measurement in theaters, and it looks like my webcam may have frozen again. Is that true, Howard?
Yep, it looks like your webcam froze. You might want to just turn it off and turn it on again. And we'll see when you get back there. There you go. You're back live again.
Yep. Okay, so the next one we come to is 21DC. Howard, why don't you take this one?
Okay. Let's see if I can get it to the next slide, or if you can just push it forward for me. So there's quite a bit of work going on in 21DC. Most of it has to do with going back over already existing documents and updating them to be consistent with what the stuff is happening in the field. A lot of it has to do with facility list management projects. 430-7 is being updated and replaced by a brand new 430-16. published to be in Q3, so that should be coming up relatively quickly as well to stay.
Yes, Dash 16 has been published, and
has been published. Okay.
And the withdrawal of Dash 7 is in process.
Is in process, right? So this basically is replacing the Dash 7 with the Dash 16, and then also the published is the Facility Exchange Protocol as well too. These FLMs are very, very handy to make sure that we know what's in each theater to create the keys, inserts, and all that kind of wonderful stuff. A lot of work on stereo subtitled documents, the revision of these, looking back over them. 428-7-2 revision as well too for operational constraints, looking at packaging time text track file is in the DP vote. That means it's in its final vote, will be passed forward then to SD audit and then republished as a revision as well too. So a lot of looking at revising, just little things that have to do with tidying up the documents so they're more consistent with what's in the field and clean up any problems that go along with that. Also a new standard, Dash 17, 429, digital cinema XML constraints, is also in a DP vote, getting fairly quick to that, close to that, to keep XML stuff all happening. We can move to the next one. I think we skipped 2 there. If you back up just 1, yeah, decentralized operation encryption project. So the FIPS has revised their encryption standard, if you will, for lack of a better term to call it. So dCinema is looking at that revision of the FIPS documents to see how much we want to incorporate it in. It's a matter of, do we chase the FIPS stuff or do we stay locked where we are? How do we feel about it? So there's an evaluation basically looking at the new FIPS and what to do on that. And then an amendment that would come up to 429-6 for MXF encryption that's also in a DP vote right now. So there'll be a churn of some documents that will come in through the end of the year with the revisions and amendments that go along with that. Additional frame rate group is we're looking at adding additional frame rates. These, of course, are the frame rates outside of 24 and 48 to incorporate them into DCDMs and DCPs. The scope has been identified. They have written up a document of all the things that will be affected. This will ripple quite heavily down through the SDI standards as well too. So it's kind of a large project to get these things incorporated into, and that work continues on. Also, a revision of RDD 29 has been done by Dolby. RDDs are registered disclosure documents. Basically, these are proprietary technologies that have been submitted to SMPTE for documentation from companies, and it's up to the company to revise them as they see fit. And so this is a heads up that RDD will be revised a bit to reflect those things that are, again, out in the field. Next slide, please. Object-based audio essence, of course, is going along as well. This kind of works between 21DC and 25CSS, both. Of course, in the 21DC, they're trying to look at how to interface that with the screen management systems and the media blocks as well, too, to be able to split up immersive audio bit streams when it comes in. So there's a new recommended practice that's being worked on for communication between the SMS and the media block. And then a new standard for operational constraints for immersive audio is being drafted as well too, along with immersive audio track file specifications that go along with ST 2098-2 to note how the bitstream would work in the track file as well too. So a lot of work going on in the 21DC area. I think that was the last slide on that one. And Alan, you may be muted, so
yes,
I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so the next one up is 24TB, which is our television and broadband committee chaired by Mike Dolan, and they're working on several projects. Actually, Howard, did you want to talk a bit about the 2112 stuff, the open binding technology?
Yeah, sure, certainly. So a lot of work has been pretty much done on the open binding ID technology. The technology is done. It's been in FCD review. The one issue with this, and a lot of discussion's been going on, that this is such a wide area, it can be applied to a lot of different things. In other words, putting an ID binded to content, basically, and what you would do with that. Think of Nielsen ratings and stuff like that that's going on, tracking rights issues, those kind of things. All these things could be wrapped in and used by this mechanism, which is the open binding ID. So there's discussion of whether they may want to do a workshop coming up in the future to discuss all these documents, how they come forward, and what they could be used for. So stay tuned. That should be published out at some point in time when they kind of get their heads wrapped around of when they want to do that and what they actually want to do for that stuff. But I won't go through each one of these documents. You can see them on the bullet points of what they've got. And if you're interested, certainly check in with the 24TB in this effort. It's quite interesting and getting a lot of looks lately.
Yeah. So the group actually sort of went underground for a while as they were researching various technologies to accomplish this, and they actually sort of had a shootout between some technology vendors and finally chose one, which these documents are now based on. So look forward to getting that stuff wrapped shortly, and perhaps some kind of a industry seminar that will help people understand its application a little bit more widely. Some other documents that 24TB is working on, there's some updates required to the closed captioning documents, to our vertical and ciliary data mapping of the SCTE 104 messages, and then something that keeps coming up in various committees, updating documents to support UHD formats, which are a fact of life these days, but a lot of the older standards didn't accommodate them, and so there's a ripple effect through that. Through various standards, and you'll see it also in the SDI standards when we get to 32NF. There is a new document being prepared on, it's a tutorial on audio-video synchronization measurement and assessment, and that document is well along, but it's still got a little bit more tidy up to do before it gets forwarded through for the ballot process. So 25CSS is our cinema sound, and they're the folks that are working on the immersive sound model and bitstream documents that we talked about just a few minutes ago in the 21DC. There's a 5 document suite, at least at this point it's 5 documents to describe immersive sound, the model, the metadata definitions, the bitstream specification itself, which is actually a fairly substantial document, as you might appreciate, and then how do the audio renderers work? So what do we expect from the renderers? What's the behavior, and how do we test them to make sure that they're complying with the expectations? And then audio, of course, is what it's all about. So the -5 document is the one that we were referring to with respect to the 21DC work. Another project that the 25CSS folks have been working on for quite a while is calibration of theaters, and they've recently published a couple of RPs. One is a baseline setup and calibration, so sort of at installation time or when there's major changes made into a theater, the baseline calibration will be done, and then on an ongoing basis, you need to make sure that the setup in the theater is still complying. So the part 2 of that RP is really just an ongoing maintenance calibration. Those are both published just recently and are now in the IEEE Digital Library. So 30MR is the next one we want to talk about, and they are the folks that look after all of the registration of metadata that's used not only within SMPTE documents but across the wider industry. As outside organizations also can register metadata with SMPTE. So a couple of the projects that they've done recently, they do release new revisions of the registers. They try to do it every 6 months. The most recent one was called Brown Sauce, and it was finished off during the summer and is now accessible on the SMPTE Registration Authority site, the SMPTE-RA.org. And that's a separate site from the SMPTE, the main SMPTE site that publishes all of the various things that are registered with SMPTE, not only just the metadata, but payload IDs and some of the other things you'll find there when you go to that link. the site has been recently updated, and I want to give a special shout out to the BBC R&D folks who've done a huge amount of work and heavy lifting on getting that done, and specifically to Thomas Heritage and Phil Tudor, who were the guys that actually made it happen. And there is now a brand new registry site, which is accessible from the main SMPTE page, but you can also go directly there from the second URL on this page. So it provides a single source of information for all the metadata registers. Used to be that they were in separate spreadsheets that you had to download from the library and poke your way through spreadsheets, and as you can appreciate, the spreadsheets got very big and unwieldy, and it was very hard not only to maintain them, but it was also hard to know that you had consistency and didn't have duplications. So about 2 years ago, we moved to an XML representation of the registers, and this most recent update to the SMPTE site is the final part of the implementation of that, where we now have all in one place the registers, and including all the published ones, so you can go back and look at the various publication milestones along the way. Even the old spreadsheet ones are there. There's a spot for submissions, so for people that are making new submissions to be included in the registers, it was always very difficult. There was separate documents that had to be submitted, and there was a back and forth process. So now you can actually try out your submission online, and the resources that are there will analyze it to make sure you have the proper syntax. They will make sure there's no duplication and make sure that it sits in the right part in that registration tree, and it, we hope, will eliminate a lot of the errors, the human errors, in getting the submissions standardized. And then there's also a big repository of documentation. So it's technical documentation, not only for the registers, how they work, but also for a bunch of online tools that you'll find on this site, which are designed to help people that are working with metadata registers and how to validate them and view various parts of the registers.
And really, huge thanks to go out to Thomas Heritage. I think they started this as a project that would go 6 months, and I think 2.5 years later, here we are with some great tools that he's just put on there for you to help you out. So thanks again to BBC R&D.
Right, and it is a living site. So as the tools are enhanced, they will be pushed up to the site so that it will stay current with the current technology that the group has worked at. And I should mention that, and we mentioned this in the last webcast, but back in the summer, the Standards Committee published Administrative Guideline 18, AG18, which is documenting the whole process of submitting the registers. So I thought I'd just give you a real quick overview of what the site looks like. This is the main page, which allows you to both view the registers and the submissions, and also to go to the documentation. This is what the registers want, so you can see the individual tables that are there. You can see where they fit in the hierarchy, and if you're really interested, you can look at the actual XML underlying if you're a member of the group. And this is the tool that is there for submissions. So there's documentation about the tools, and then templates, and you can also take a snapshot of the current registers as they exist to try and figure out where your submission should go in the tree. So the registers, again, are a living document, and that's why they're published online. Howard, did you have anything further to add about the new RA site?
No, just that it is an ongoing process. We continue to upgrade it as we go along, and we're getting towards more and more closer to an automated system. So, you know, when I look back to the old days where we had 3 people doing 3 spreadsheets, we've come a long way. So there's really a lot of people involved to make this happen on the 30MR side. John Hurst, Pierre Lemieux, and of course all the folks from BBC to get this forward, and Stan Cassette as well from Dolby. So thanks to that group.
Great. Okay, a couple of other projects that 30MR is working on is, one is related to UMID. There's 2 or 3 sub-items under that. There's a new UMID resolution protocol, which is being worked on, and then there's revisions to the underlying documents, ST330 and ST205, which need to be done. One of them, the 205 one, is a ripple carry-on from the 330 revision. Some of those come out of a study group that was hosted in 30MR, and that report was issued a couple of quarters ago, and then this is new work that's carrying on from that. And then a brand new standard that is getting close to publication. It's actually all approved now, and it's in the publication queue, ST2102, which is a core metadata set. So it's a interoperable minimum set of metadata for professional motion imaging. So it's sort of tried to encapsulate all the basic things that anybody that's working in the motion industry, motion imaging industry, would need to specify and to make sure that everybody's doing it the same way. So look for that shortly in the digital library. A couple of other things that are, there's some tidy up, obviously, of older work. As I mentioned, AG18 was published recently, and it will cause some ripple effects through some of the standards which had documented some of the older processes. So those processes are being removed out of those underlying standards, and they will now live in AG18, which is maintained by the Standards Committee. So there's a bunch of other documents. I won't go into them all by detail. Some of them have been published. Some of them are getting almost ready to publish. So 31FS is the next committee that we're coming to, and it's chaired by Bruce Devlin, who is our new incoming Standards Vice President. He will start his term in January, and Paul Gardner. So there'll be a new chair, co-chair appointed for 31FS come the beginning of the year. So 31FS is responsible for all the file systems that we maintain in SMPTE, and one of the biggest ones of those is the material exchange format known as MXF. And not only is the underlying base document 377-1 a very large document, it's a complex document. It's gone through a bunch of amendments, and it's currently being updated to incorporate the amendments back into the main base document. It references the old style of the registers, and so this will be sort of the last version that references the old styles, and it's really just a cleanup revision of the document to provide a stable reference for all of the MXF content that exists today. There are some new things that are planned for it, and so those will be done in phase 2 once the phase 1 revision is done. And the new phase 2 one will actually reference the new XML-based registers and fix a bunch of issues that are known in the 377 document. So that's a huge amount of work. Bruce is actively involved in that himself, because he is within SMPTE. He's known as Mr. MXF, and in fact that's the name of his company. He spends his life consulting on things MXF, and provides a huge amount of expertise to the whole specification and the workflow. Howard?
Yeah, so this is his homework he's got to get done before he takes over the SVP chair. So I think they're going to try to wrap this up before the end of the year is the goal, to do this and then get that ready for FCD.
Yes, that is correct. And Bruce is not working on it solo. He has a bunch of other experts that are working on it with him. It's a huge project to try and resolve some of the inconsistencies that are there in the documentation, but it's a necessary piece of work to be able to allow us to move forward. Some of the other MXF related projects, so there's KLV encoded syntax is getting ready for its DP vote. MXF descriptive metadata is actually going for a second FCD vote because it didn't receive enough votes the first time through. So it's being tidied up, and we'll go around the loop one more time. The AAC Family Compressed Digital Audio in MXF was published recently, so that's available in the store now. The AdID Digital Slate for MXF, that project was actually terminated by the proponents, so that document won't be published unless there's new proponents to come along and pick up the work on it. And then 2 RDDs, the AXF, MXF Mapping and Operating Points, that's an older one that was revised recently. It's now approved and in the publication queue. And the RDD 44 is Apple ProRes and MXF. That is a revision also of an existing RDD. That one is just in the ST audit, and that will be published sometime before the end of the year.
Yep, and that kind of gets it ready, the RDD ready for implementation in IMF, kind of in some other work that's going on. So that's, I think, a big step forward.
Yeah, that was one of the main impetuses to do that revision, and thanks for pushing that through quickly to all the people involved. Another big project that 31FS has been working on is the archive exchange format, known as AXF. You'll come to know that at SMPTE we have a bunch of acronyms. Often people refer to acronym soup or alphabet soup, but the AXF is all about archives of media, and I won't go into the details of it, but basically it's a format agnostic, device agnostic way of storing archives of media content on various types of current technology and future technology. It's been widely adopted in the industry, both inside SMPTE and out. I know the Library of Congress has been very actively involved in utilizing it. And recently it was approved as an ISO standard, 12034-1. It hasn't actually been published yet, but it's been approved and it's in their publication queue. That will give it some wider exposure to industries outside of our media industry, because it is a generally applicable standard.
Yeah, ISO, meaning for those that are unaware, is the International Standards Organization. So that's a worldwide standard, if you will. I mean, SMPTE standards are worldwide as well too, but this gives it a lot more horsepower, if you will, behind it. It's actually done by governments, basically voting, or representations of governments, if you will.
Correct. It has a lot more visibility in other sectors outside of the media and entertainment sector, who may or may not even know that SMPTE exists. So, and then there is a part 2, which is currently in progress. Again, big amount of work, a small but dedicated group of people have been working on this, and it's been a huge effort. Another acronym is DPX, and DPX is a image format that has been around for a couple of decades, I guess. There's a current document, a new document that's being prepared, which is a constrained application of DPX, and specifically to address the needs of the HDR and WCG folks. It has passed FCD ballot. It's in comment resolution. There was a bunch of comments, so they've got a lot of work to do to resolve those. Howard, do you want to have a say on that?
Yeah, just to highlight this, especially for those in the post-production side of the business, should take notice of this. ST268 has been around for quite some time. It's now been changed, the original document, to ST268-1, and then this, like Alan was saying, is going to be a constrained version of that. So you may want to look into it. It's about 43 comments right now, so they've got some work to do to resolve all those comments to move the thing forward. But you may want to just kind of keep a heads up on this one as it starts coming down the pipeline, getting towards publication.
Okay, the next committee that we'll talk about is 32NF. Actually, Joel, did you want to break for some comments or questions?
Well, yes. And actually, I was just going to remind our guests that you can ask questions. Verbal questions are preferred. Just type into the question box, and we will break and let you ask your question. And that's all I wanted, Alan, is I just wanted to remind folks that they could ask.
Okay. You can break in when you see some questions again. So 32NF is one of our largest committees and one of our busiest committees. It's chaired by John Snow and Friedrich Gerlinger, and they have 4 active working groups that subdivide their workflow because it's all about our interfaces and timing and synchronization. Those are sort of the big high-level things that 32NF talk about, and so those are obviously very, very critical as we move content around through production and post-production and define ways of physical networks and ways of doing that. So one of the big projects that 32NF has been working on recently for the last, I guess about 18 months now, is professional media over managed IP networks. The standard suite that they're working on is called ST2110, and there are multiple documents in the suite that are specifying the carriage, synchronization, and description of how to pack elementary essence streams into IP for the purpose primarily of live production. So basically how to replicate the functionality that we have today with SDI interfaces in an IP world. And it goes beyond that because there's a lot of new workflows that will be enabled by having IP distribution, but the out of the gate requirement is to not lose the functionality that we already have with our SDI interfaces. And so this group is a group of about 150 people, I think, in the drafting group that have been working away at this. They meet every week. They make really great progress, and so I just wanted to quickly run through the different documents and describe them a little bit. Howard, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, just the biggest difference between this and SDI is this 2110 allows you to break away audio, video separately, and metadata such as captions. So that's a huge difference. We already had a SD2022, I believe, that embedded just HD SDI strictly into IP. So this is much more versatile in that sense.
Correct, and we envision this being the platform for interfaces moving forward. Joel, I think you also already had a webcast about 2110 as well, is that correct?
We did actually back in June, and the Citrix folks are looking to feature it on one of their new sites. But I also wanted to mention that SMPTE is planning to launch an ST2110 virtual course in early 2018. It's in development now, and folks are taking a look at it to make sure that it's accurate and on the mark, and we've invited Howard and Thomas Balsa-Mason and Thomas Edwards to look at it to confirm that it's what it needs to be, and I just wanted to let folks know that that is on its way.
Okay, so watch your inbox for information about that. So let's just quickly run through the 2110 documents. There are 6 of them at the moment. So -10 is sort of the overall system, timing, and definitions that apply across the whole suite of documents. RTP is the protocol that's being used to encapsulate the essence, and so it describes how that all works and how each of the streams are carried in the network. The -20 family of documents are all about uncompressed active video, or sorry, they're about video. So -20 specifically is uncompressed active video. It carries only the active video lines, unlike SDI, which carries synchronization and ancillary data as well. So the sync and ancillary data is carried separately, as Howard mentioned. So the uncompressed active video matrix is carried in the -20. And it's designed to be resolution and frame rate independent, so it can handle any frame rate, can handle any resolution from 1:1 up to, I think, 32K by 32K. So that allows it to carry little logos and bugs separately if you want, or to carry complete rasters. And
the caveat on that, yeah, sorry to interrupt, but the caveat on that is it depends on the bandwidth of your network. Of course, if you have a 1 gig network, you're not going to be shoving UHD uncompressed through that. So just be aware of that.
Yep. Yeah, that is true. So Dash 21 is a timing model for video, and basically it helps to manage the network traffic flows. So obviously the bandwidth required, as Howard mentioned, for video is much higher than it is for audio or for ancillary data or for timing for that matter. And so Dash 21 specifies how we can manage the available bandwidth and manage the traffic flows to make sure that all of the essence stream gets through normal switches and networks, so that you don't have bunching and lost packets and things like that, because in real-time flows it's important to make sure that all the packets get through. So Dash 30, the 30 family of suites are all about audio. So the first one was the Dash 30, and it's about PCM audio, so uncompressed audio. And it leverages the transport that was done by the AES folks, known as AES 67, and it relies heavily on that, although it's not identical to AES 67. And then the Dash 31 document is talking about AES 3 audio. So in our SDI flows, we used AES 3 embedded into the video, and it was used not only for uncompressed, but it was also, there was many different ways of compressing the audio and putting it in as raw data in an AES 3 wrapper. And so the Dash 31 document is really all about how to transport anything that was in an AES 3 wrapper transparently, so it doesn't require that you know what's inside the AES 3 wrapper, it just transports it. So that means that all of the formats that were previously transported in AES 3, and those are specified in in SMPTE ST337, those can all be transported. There's a host of compressed formats and other types of data that were compressed into AES3, and there may be more even coming.
Yeah, just one example of that would be Dolby E, for example. That's one of the types that could be carried in this AES3.
Correct. Correct, but there's also a bunch of other ones, other types of compressed audio. In fact, one of the other projects that 32NF has, which we'll just highlight a little bit later, is the mapping of all of those different compressed formats into AES3 using ST337. So then the Dash 40 series of documents are all about ancillary data. So there's been a lot of data that was packaged into ancillary data, vertical ancillary data mostly, in the SDI flows. And so Dash 40 is really how do we transport that in RTP. It's leveraging an IETF RFC, which is due to be published any day now. So the draft standard, as it's written currently, references the draft IETF document, and once it's released and we have a document number, then we can finish this off and get it out. So that includes things like closed captioning, time labels, AFD, and any kind of other ancillary data that is transported. And there's a whole host of it. In fact, as we mentioned previously, the SMPTE RA site is one of the places where that stuff is all documented as to how it transports in ancillary data. So those are the 6 documents that are currently being worked on, and just wanted to update you on where we're at with them. Dash 20, 10, 20, and 30 are in the publication queue. They're ready to be published. Dash 20 references, normally references part 21. And so we can't publish it until 21 is available. So because 21 is now in the ST audit and we expect it to be completed shortly, then all 4 of those documents will be published at the same time, along with an overview document which is currently being worked on. And we anticipate that will happen probably sometime before December.
Yeah, it might be in your Thanksgiving dinner. Might be ready for that.
Well, I'm sure that there's
if it all goes good.
I'm sure there'll be a bunch of people within the drafting group that will be giving lots of thanks when this is published, and we should thank them for all the hard work they've done.
Absolutely.
As I mentioned, Part 21 is past EP vote is in ST audit. Part 31 is just getting ready to go into its FCD ballot. FCD means final committee draft, so this is really the technical ballot that the whole technology committee gets to comment and vote to approve or not on the document. So the pre-FCD review is an informal comment period, and then the final ballot will start shortly after that, and it's a 5-week ballot. So we probably won't see that one until early first quarter of 2018. And then Part 40 has passed its FCD ballot. It's currently in comment resolution, and it will be coming down the pipe shortly, but we have to wait for the IETF document before we can actually proceed to draft publication with it. There was going to be another document. Originally, it was -50, and we've made the decision that it's going to actually, the same document will occur, but it'll have a new document number, and it'll be part of the 2022 family, because it really talks about how we can carry 2022-6 streams, which are the encapsulated SDI over IP streams, how they can be carried in a 2110 compatible way. And so we felt it made more sense to keep the 2022 stuff together in the same family. So there is work actively working on this new 2022-8 document. So the next group that we want to talk about in 32NF is 32NF40, which is the working group that is responsible for all of the HD and SD interfaces, and it sort of overlaps a little bit with our -70 group, which talks about the UHD interfaces. So as you know, if you've been involved in SMPTE a long time, we have a lot of different SDI interfaces that have been developed over the last 2.5, 3 decades. And several people, a lot of people actually, have been asking for roadmap documents on how these documents are all related, what formats are carried on each interface, and what are the bandwidth requirements of each interface. We started this project as a single document and realized very quickly that you would need the whole wall of your living room to post it, because it would be very complex. So we broke it into 3 documents, one for standard definition and one for HDSDI, one for ultra high definition, and one for the 10 gigabit SDI. And if you've read the SMPTE journal recently, in July, you'll notice that there was a roadmap wall chart that was published in there, which is essentially going to be the same as the 2111-2 roadmap document. The 10 gigabit one is being developed and will happen sometime in 2018 in the journal, and I believe the plan is also to do the 2111-1 in the journal, so that you will be able to get them. But the official documents will be posted in the digital library once they're available. And basically it allows people a handy reference to figure out what interfaces to use for what formats, and there are a lot of them, and it's very complex.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of good work on this thing. One thing, ignore the little typo at the very front. It's not the 2110 suite, it's the 2111 suite. It's just we get so enamored with 2110, it kind of hangs over into the stuff. But these have been fantastic. If you get the journal, if you don't, become a SMPTE member. The journal is amazing, and these roadmaps I found to be very, very handy up on your walls, a very quick reference. So look forward to the rest of them being published as well.
Yes, the SMPTE Journal is one of the the complimentary member privileges when you become a SMPTE member. I will fix the slide before we get Joel to publish the PDF. Joel, maybe you can set a note to remind me to do that. Another pair of documents that have been worked on for a while now are EG34 and RP198, and these are documents that help us measure the performance of the SDI interfaces. The way that content is put on the SDI, there are certain bit patterns that cause particular grief for extended cable lengths, and we call those pathological conditions because they can cause the interfaces to die if you don't deal with them properly. So those documents are currently being updated not only to support the faster interfaces, but also to more tightly specify how the conditions exist and how we can test for them and make sure that our interfaces actually perform well in the light of them. So been a lot of work on those. They are making progress. They're in comment resolution at the moment, and hopefully we'll see them come out through the other end of the pipeline shortly. 32NF40 also deals with fiber interfaces, and there has been a new ruggedized connector that was standardized, ST2091-1, that was standardized earlier this year. Part 2 is currently getting ready for ballot, and it talks about how to map 10 gig interfaces that were previously carried on a proprietary connector into this new standardized connector, because they are not directly compatible. They're not pin compatible with each other, but they are performance compatible. So that's why we felt it was important. So part 2 is telling you how to map one into the other.
And this is where, you know, when you work in the standards, there's somebody that you don't know everything about everything. But I had a question. Basically, is the 12 gig also a part of that ruggedized part 2?
I believe the 12 gig can be carried on the ruggedized connector. The 10 gig is a special case because the 10 gig standard, which is SMPTE 2036-3, that standard not only specifies the mapping of the 10 gig data into the fiber, but it also specifies a connector. And so because 2091 specifies an alternate connector, we felt it was important for that one particular connector to tell people how to map it from one connector into the other. But I believe the ruggedized connector will handle all the stuff up to and maybe even perhaps past 12 gig, but up to supporting 12 gig. And the last two that I wanted to talk about are the transport of haptic tactiles. So the -1 document was done in our Essence Committee and previously published earlier this year. And so haptic tactile essence is think of it as the shared shakers that you might have experienced in the theater. This is to transport it through the television ecosystem, even as far as your living room. So we need to transport that data now that we've defined it. And again, you'll see one of the mechanisms is to map it into AES3, and another one is to map it into ancillary data. And the AES3, of course, can be transported on 2110 using that new -31 document that's in the process. Another project that has affected a lot of documents is the signaling of high dynamic range and wide color gamut. Again, all of our interfaces currently support the carriage of those signals, but we need to identify them. There is a payload ID that is carried on all the SDI signals, and so it has to be updated now to include the signaling for HDR and WCG. So the basic functionality can be carried in the payload ID. There is a new standard, ST2108, which will carry extended metadata for HDR and WCG, and that one is moving along nicely now, but the it gets referenced by the payload ID, so the payload ID basically has to ripple through all of our SDI interfaces, and there's a bunch of them, as I just mentioned. So again, that's a big chunk of work, and the plan is to have that signaling carried right through to your living room, so that if you have an HDR monitor or TV, that it will do the right thing, as we know that there are multiple ways of encoding HDR in the signal, and so the TV that's decoding the signal at the other end has to know how it was mastered so that it could be displayed properly.
And I just want to highlight the point that the ITU is going to do something a little bit different than SMPTE. So the good news is the ITU just held their SG6 meeting in Geneva, where they agreed to harmonize the standards with SMPTE, so we'll be on the same page. So I think that's a huge kind of milestone moving forward as well too, to make this stuff all harmonized and consistent. So
yeah, and that was one of the holdups in getting the SMPTE documents revised, is we didn't want to head down a different road than the ITU. So 32NF70 is our working group on ultra-high def SDI interfaces. So this is basically 6 gig and 12 gig interfaces. And again, there's a bunch of documents here. The 2081 series are the 6 gig ones. The 2082 series are the 12 gig ones. There's a physical interface document for both, and then there's mappings. The -10 and 11 ones are for single link, the 20s are for dual link, and the 30s are for quad link. And so those documents, some of the quad link ones are just being created now. Some of the single link ones are now open for their one of your reviews, and also to add this HDR signaling in the payload. The new ones that are currently being worked on, the signaling is being put in right from the get-go, because we know what it is now. 32NF80 is the last working group of 32NF, and it deals with time labeling and synchronization. About 2 years ago now, or maybe a year and a half ago, we published SMPTE ST2059-1 and 2, and these were really the fundamental standards that documented a new time-based synchronization system. So for decades now, color black, analog color black, has been the way of referencing and synchronizing media systems both in TV plants and post-production facilities. And with the move to IP infrastructure, there needed to be a new way to synchronize all of this content. So 2059 leverages the IEEE 1588 standard, and basically what it does is it distributes a very high accuracy time across the network and identifies a point in time, which happens to be January the 1st of 1970, when all of the signals that we know about were in fact synchronized, and then we call that point in time the SMPTE epoch. So knowing that and knowing what time it is today, that allows us to synchronize all of these signals, so all the different video formats, all the different audio formats, and even time, SMPTE time code. All of that stuff can be calculated, and so that's how the SMPTE 2059 system works. There was a lot of confusion because this is like totally new technology. How does this stuff all work? And so EG 2059-10 was written, and it published earlier this year, and it's an introduction to the new synchronization system, basically written for people that need to come up to speed on that. There's 3 other EGs that are currently being worked on, things that are best practices for deploying the system, and that stuff is fairly complex, and some of it's taken a back seat to the 2110 stuff, quite frankly, because the same people are working on it. But those are moving along now, and we should see them shortly. One of the other things we've been doing a lot of is, because the synchronization system was brand new. We've been doing a lot of interoperability testing between different vendors, and at each of the major trade shows, the IBC and NAB, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've demonstrated interoperation of these IP systems, including the transport of essence and now using 2110, and also the synchronization. And we did that again at the annual conference in Hollywood last week, and it was very, very well attended, along with the tutorials, which were Q&As about 2110 and 2059. The interoperability testing has gone well, and quite frankly, the documents were pretty solid right out of the gate. There was a few interoperability issues that were identified, and so the 1-year revision of 2059-1 and -2 are underway to incorporate the learnings from that interoperability testing that was required. Howard, did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, this is kind of, you can see a process now starting. We started doing interoperability testing in PlugFest with the 21DC, the digital cinema stuff continued in through the 2059, and now, of course, 35 PM for the IMF stuff is using this. It's really something that really helps us out to be in a parallel process of, while we're working on a document, to actually try these things in the field, do interoperability testing in PlugFest with manufacturers. So you're going to see a lot more of this stuff ongoing with SMPTE as we move more to doing parallel processing of documents and the practical test at the same time.
That is correct, and I should just mention that at IBC we had over 50 different vendors who were participating in the what we call the IP showcase, but in order for them to participate in the showcase, they had to also participate in the testing because we want to make sure that they truly did interoperate, and we could know for sure that the system was reliable. So a lot of different vendors are now starting to deploy this stuff, and it's great to see cooperation from them. Did you want to ask a question there, Joel?
We do have a question from Mike, actually.
Okay.
The question is, will 2080-4 address the discrepancy between RP 2019-2 and RP 2080-2 for setting monitor black level, or suggest methodology for transitioning between the two?
Wow, that's a great question. And I don't have a detailed answer. Howard, did you want to chime in on that one?
No, I would just say it's a really great question. It's been discussed quite a bit in the drafting group, I know. At first they thought they didn't want to specify black levels, but now with HDR coming down the pipe, they started to go down that road. I don't have a specific answer to that question, but boy, good question. And I know that they're looking at that. I don't have an answer exactly for it at this moment.
Perhaps, Joel, you could forward the specific question to Howard and I, and we can then correspond with the person that asked the question and get an answer. That's probably the best way of dealing with it, so that we don't miss something. And if it isn't something, then maybe it's something they need to think about as they're moving down that road. And Howard, I think your headset is doing its thing again.
Okay, I'll check it. Thank you.
And I will forward that and make the connection, and that's all the questions we have for the moment.
Okay, so the last, I think this is the last slide on 32NF. As I mentioned, 32NF is responsible for maintaining ST337, which is the document that specifies how all these different data streams can be packed into AES3. And there's quite a list of them. There's an identifier that goes along with the in the stream that tells you what the content is. So there's 3 new standards that are currently being worked on, and as we mentioned earlier, the haptic tactile people are going to be adding a 4th one shortly. But MPEG-H 3D audio streams in AES3, multi-dimensional audio over AES3, and audio metadata So again, there's a lot of stuff that people have been using to pack into AS3 because it's a great container for handling reasonable amounts of data alongside the video. So the last one, 2109, is an active one. The MDA over AS3, we're still waiting for a submission from the proponent, so it's sort of on hold, and the 2041-4 is certainly well in the works. The last thing I wanted to mention is that there was a study group on flow control for professional media networks that was undertaken. The report has now been finalized. It's in the publication queue. There was a paper about it presented at the annual conference last week, just describing a lot of the stuff that was in it. But basically, it's a study group that was put together at the request of the North American Broadcasters Association, NABA, they wanted to look at the problem of how we can manage the flow of content in IP networks. And so it looks at a whole bunch of different issues and comes up with some recommendations. And some of that has been already started to be worked on in the 2110 family. There's other work still to be done. So that will be published shortly on the SMPTE website. It'll be available to anyone, and it will be a good read, I think, to bring it sort of up to speed on what some of the issues are and what some of the proposals are for solutions. So 34CS is a committee that is chaired by Chris Lennon and Carl Paulson, and there's really just two projects that they are working on. The biggest one is BXF, so another acronym, the Broadcast Exchange Format. And it's a suite of document that's been around now for 7 or 8 years, I think. Basically, it was born out of a need to manage the flow of information between the various traffic systems and automation in a television facility. And it's gone through now 5 iterations, so we're up to BXF 5.0. There's a bunch of new features that have been added, and one of them is documented in RP2021-6, which is actually an SDK for BXF, so basically a mechanism for how do vendors get into and talk to other systems that are using BXF and control them and find data from them. So the new versions in 5.0 also required revisions to 5 other parts of the document. So all 6 parts were published recently, I think in September, and they're all now available in the library. The group is sort of taking a much needed rest because they sort of went full out trying to get 5.0 done. They're receiving inputs for the 6.0 version. There's 9 inputs that they've got already, some of them from NABA and DPP, so that some of them are coming out of the study group that I just mentioned, and some of them are also part of work that I'm going to talk about in a minute in IMF, the IMF delivery work going on in 35 p.m. So if you have other requests for BXF 6.0, then you can send those probably to Chris Lennon, who's the chair of that group, or if not, you can forward them to standards@SMPTE.org, and we'll make sure that they get passed on to the relevant people in the drafting group. And then the other group is media control over IP. So this touches on the control of these IP networks. Originally it was designed for controlling devices, but it also moves over into controlling streams that are happening over IP and knowing what devices are connected and all of those issues. And so that work is completing. There's two parts of that document suite that are going through revision at the moment. And there's still some more work that needs to be done to update it, but there's also work trying to be done to harmonize it with some of the other proposals that are happening in our industry. Howard?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the last part that you did, Alan. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes now for where this really should go. As you're maybe aware of, AMWA has the ISO 4, 5, and continuing on to 6, which is not media device control, but more registration and discovery. But this certainly will be coming up at some point in time, and there are a couple of different proposals that are out there in the field already in the industry. But the good news is I think that people are now starting to come together and looking at harmonizing these efforts so that we can come up with one standard for media device over IP.
Yes, one standard would be good. Okay, so let's move on to our last committee at 35 p.m., chaired by Pierre Lemieux. 35 p.m. Really has one overall project, and that's the interoperability mastering format, interoperable mastering format, I guess is the
master format, yeah.
Master format. So another alphabet acronym, partly because the names are too long to say every time. So Howard, did you want to talk about this? Because you used to chair this committee.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we love our TLAs and FLAs, 3-letter acronyms and 4-letter acronyms. So in the IMF stuff, IMF is fairly mature now, actually, for the core set of documents. It's been around for quite some time, certainly at the 1.0 level. But everything has been looked at now with a 1-year revision. A couple other things that are going on is there is an interoperable master format or IMF forum as well, too, that's hosted by the HPA. If you're not involved with that and you do want to be involved with IMF, that's a great place to start off with. I would encourage everybody to look that up. You can find it on the HPA website. Yeah, might be in the...
There's a slide here.
A slide forward. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I'm way ahead of myself. Anyway, when we get to that, we'll talk about that, but I encourage you to reach out to this group. It is a lot like what the ISDCF does for digital cinema. It actually is a clearinghouse for all of the problems where the usual suspects can get together, content owners, service providers, vendors, equipment, and talk about the issues of really implementing IMF in the field. It's one thing to write this stuff down on the paper. It's another thing to actually make this work in the real world. So this is really a great group to get together with, especially if you're involved with IMF or going to get involved with IMF, where you can come up to speed with all the things IMF. Yeah, we can flip back again. I just jumped the gun a little bit. So most of the stuff has gone through their 1-year review. They're kind of designating it as IMF 1.1. You can see the list of the core suite of documents that makes up IMF. Along with that, there's an amendment to 102, which is the common image pixel color schemes. So this is added an amendment to support 4K, wide color gamut, HDR, and those things that are just popping up, and will be published in Q3 if it's not published already.
It's actually Joel, it's already published.
Already published. Joel, you might have a question?
Not a question. Just wanted to let folks know, if you don't know already, as we are working on the 2110 course, we just concluded the final instance of our virtual IMF course with Bruce Devlin and Pierre-Anthony Lemieux as instructors. The new schedule will be going up shortly, and we're planning to offer the next course, I think, towards the end of January. That's all.
Yeah, that's great, and I know a lot of folks in the industry are starting to kick in with this. I know Sky is doing IMF stuff, Netflix as well. There's a lot of stuff in Hollywood that's going on with IMF, so highly recommend that you get involved with the users group and take the course as well too. The course probably is a great place to start before the users group so you can get up to speed on this stuff. Other things going on is the revision of 2067-101, COMIMAGE, image deference, and macros that will go to FCD ballot shortly. Also, dynamic metadata control volume for IMF applications. This is, of course, all of the new HDR dynamic metadata and gamma mapping transforms that come involved. This is a way to put those into a file format such as IMF versus what you would do in SDI or streaming media. So, of course, IMF is all based on file format and file delivery types of things. The new document is coming up as well for audio content element kind definition. Also a new document, immersive audio bitstream level 0 as a plug-in into the file formats as well too. Of course, with immersive audio coming in the 25 CSS and getting closer to being finalized, this is a way to look into implementing this in a file-based workflow as well too. And go to the next slide. Other new standards, IMF application number 5, ACES basically. So being able to encapsulate ACES into an IMF framework is ongoing. This would be great, especially for archival purposes, also for exchanging content among VFX and all kinds of different things to go on. So its FCD ballot is in process as we stand right now. That should be tidied up pretty soon. Hopefully maybe published by the very first part of the year. Another new standard is the -9, which is sidecar composition map. This defines an XML document that can carry a package, an IMF package, if you will, an IMP asset, and associates with other packages as well too, called sidecar assets. So again, that is in FCD ballot as we speak, and is expected to come out of the oven fairly soon as well too. And then there's an amendment on the -40, that's the Cinema Mezzanine application. It passed the FCD ballot, and I think what that amendment is just basically as they get out in the field, they found a couple of things, and so that'll update that document as well too for a Cinema Mezzanine format. There's a new RDD 45 IMF application for ProRes format that's going on now as we speak as well too. A lot of the broadcasters came to us as IMF got standard and said, look, we have all this stuff in ProRes. How do we get ProRes into IMF? Because that would fit very nicely. ProRes was not a standard, is not a standard, so by making an RDD, it gives you a way to actually work for an IMF application in using a ProRes format instead of JPEG 2000, which is one of the ones that was specified in the original IMF documents, if we will, as an application, along with other applications that are out there as well too. So this RDD ballot is, all the comments have been resolved, and it's heading for the ST audit, so that she'll be in a publication queue pretty soon as well too.
Right, so the RDD 44, which is the underlying ProRes RDD, was modified as a result of the work on RDD 45. There was some requests that needed to be put back into the underlying RDD. So we mentioned that earlier under 31FS. Right,
exactly. And I think we've already discussed the IMF users group as well too, but one more time again, just to get everybody aware of this. I greatly encourage you to get involved, especially if you are working in IMF as it stands right now. It's a great clearinghouse for all the issues that come up with implementing IMF in the field. And I think that is the end of the IMF side of the package. I'll turn it back over to you, Alan.
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, we hold face-to-face standards meetings quarterly. Usually December, March, June, and September. So our next one is just in about 4 weeks, and it'll be held in Santa Clara, California, hosted by Arista Networks. In March of 2018, we're going to be going to the brand new SMPTE office in White Plains, New York. In June of 2018, we'll be going to Ryerson University in Toronto, hosted by the Toronto SMPTE section. In September, we're heading back to the EBU headquarters in Geneva. And in December, we're trying to confirm, we had some tentative plans there, but we expect it to be somewhere on the west coast of the U.S. Yep. And just a reminder where the two places you can go to find more about SMPTE standards. One is the engineering committees, which gives you the overviews of all the committees, and then the meeting outcome reports, which are posted there every quarter, so you can see not only the most recent one, but the previous ones are all posted there as well for your reading pleasure. And I think that is the end. So I don't know if there's any other questions that have popped up there, Joel.
There are no questions yet in the queue. I'd like to invite our guests to go ahead and post your questions in the question box. And again, verbal questions are preferred. You go right to the top of the list. And I do have one question, and forgive me if you mentioned it in your discussion here, but where does VR and AR stand in the process? Have folks approached us?
Actually, we did not mention that. Howard, do you want to talk about that? You've been
Yeah, sure. We've been talking about VR and AR for quite some time. There's a lot of efforts that are going out throughout the industry right now, but we've got enough momentum now that we're working on starting a study group that should crop up pretty soon. A proposal has been submitted. It's in review right now with the SVP, Alan, and of course the ST as well too. That review should complete, I think, maybe by the end of next week. So slightly before Thanksgiving, I think we should have a project up and running. We don't have a date for the first meeting, but it's going to be looking at VR and AR specifically in what SMPTE's, our lane is, and that is from the production up to a distribution master. So we're not diving into consumer technology or headset and display technologies. Of course, we'll review those things, but this is really to look at from production to distribution master. Is there standards that are already existing? Are there standards that are missing? Kind of a gap analysis and what we would do. The conclusion of this study effort or study group would be to write a report that would be published out to the public describing what the findings are from the study group effort. So that's coming up shortly. Stay tuned. I think we'll probably have an announcement once that project gets up and rolling.
Yeah, and that'll be undertaken in our 10E Essence Technology Committee.
Thank you. Let's see. We had a request to put the links that you showed in the previous slide in the chat box. I've done that. So you should just be able to click on those links and go to the outcome report and see more information about standards activities. I do have a question from Willie. Willie asks, is 2110-40 approved already?
It is not approved. It's finished its FCD ballot. It's currently in comment resolution. So there was probably 20 or 30 comments that were raised during the ballot process. Some of them are minor, some of them are more significant, and they're in the process of addressing those and making changes to accommodate the comments as required. But we can't make the document progress until the underlying IETF document is approved. Now, I heard at the conference last week that they expect that to be published by the IETF in probably 2 to 3 weeks. So I think we'll be probably on our own timeline, we'll be probably about the right point to actually make our document move along, but we'll have to hold our document until that document is available because it will be a normative reference to ours.
Very good. Well, that seems to be all of the questions that we have. You folks certainly are busy. That was a lot of information to go through. Thank you very much. I'd like to also thank our guests for participating in today's webcast. And Howard, Alan, thank you very much for pulling it together. I think probably the next one will be presented by Howard and Bruce Devlin.
Bruce Devlin, yeah. That's right, Alan. This is probably Alan's last webinar for Standards Broadcast. So, and I'm gonna miss him. He's been a great partner and one of the best SVPs I think we ever had for Standards.
Well, I've enjoyed doing the work, and it has been a lot of work, as you can appreciate. But
a lot of work.
It's sometimes like herding cats, a big group of them. But we've got a lot of really dedicated volunteers who want to make sure that SMPTE standards are done well and that they're solid, rock solid standards. And so sometimes that takes a little longer than some of us would like, but we do try and keep things moving along as quickly as we can.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you for your support, Alan, and thank you for not only presenting this webcast, but all of the standards webcasts and all of your work in the standards groups that you have done over the past several years. And Howard, thank you. To our guests, safe travels if you're going anywhere. This does conclude our webcast for today. I'll get the on-demand video ready to go, and an email with a link to the PDF of slides presented once we have gone through it, to make sure that there are no typos beyond that one that was mentioned. But take care. We'll see you next time in a SMPTE webcast, whether it be standards or education. Bye-bye now.